Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Joining me now is Congresswoman Paulina Luna. Congresswoman, thanks for joining me again.
Thanks for having me back on.
Of course, you had a viral moment this weekend after the bill funding or sending aid to Ukraine passed. Members of Congress were waving Ukraine flags. You told them to put them away. Can you bring us to that moment and talk about it?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's in my opinion that no flag other than the American flag should be allowed, especially on the House floor. And mind you, earlier in the year, I just want to put it in perspective. We get talked to about decorum and how to behave on the floor all the time. If you're even wearing a jacket that's not considered proper attire, they're going to ask you to either put on a tie or remove the jacket. And so when I saw them passing around these flags, obviously, first of all, it's breaking decorum, but secondly, it's disrespectful, mainly because you're in the House chambers. And last time I checked, we're the House of Representatives of the United States, not of Ukraine. And so I got up, and I think that they thought I was going to do something parliamentary order-wise, and I ultimately ended up telling them to put the damn flags away. And honestly, rightfully so, but you saw that they did. And what I will tell you is that I don't really think that it sets a good precedent, especially because of how many people have fought and died for the American flag, to have them wave the Ukrainian flag, ultimately.
Do you know who brought the flags out initially?
I didn't see the member specifically that was handing them out, but it was someone in the Democrat Party. And so if you notice, you actually saw a lot of footage coming from the House floor that was filming that. And, there are rules that you can't film on the House floor, but if they're going to break decorum, then we're going to do the same thing. And I think it was important for the American people to see that you don't see that type of unification behind the American flag, but when it comes to sending billions of your tax dollars overseas to a country that, again, never decided to join NATO, they're all for it. And so I thought that that was especially hypocritical, mainly because it wasn't just Ukraine that the aid was going towards. It was also supposed to be going towards Taiwan, which we can get to in a second. We saw that there's a loophole that would give that funding to Ukraine as well in that bill, and then also Israel. But as you saw, Democrats only waved the Ukraine flag.
And did any member of Congress who voted for the aid agree with you when you said put the flags away?
I mean, I think that there was a majority of the conference that asked, that shared the same sentiment. And then also, too, Speaker Johnson also got up on the podium and said, hey, stop breaking decorum. But the fact is that if you are a representative, why is it that all of a sudden these people are waving a foreign flag on the House chambers? It's probably one of the most sacred parts of our country, and yet it's supposed to be okay. I think, though, that there were some Democrats that were likely embarrassed based on the behavior that you saw.
You did not vote for the foreign aid package. Can you talk about that decision a bit for us?
Yeah, so initially, there is a parliamentary procedure. It's called voting for the rule. And there was a lot in this foreign aid package that, again, was being lied to in the public when addressing it. So the first thing is obviously there was supposed to be funding for Taiwan, but there was a loophole that was actually written into that bill that would allow for the president to reallocate those funds, even though Congress said, hey, it's supposed to go towards Taiwan, to really harden up against potentially a threat of China. And that would have been able to be something that would have been waived to give then funding to Ukraine. And then also we saw separately from that the Ukraine loan itself was not actually a loan, because they also wrote in there that the president could waive that payback, and ultimately Ukraine would not be held accountable for that. And so there was a lot within this package that I felt was not really truly transparent to the American people. And so I voted against the rule, I voted against Ukraine, and I voted against the funding for Taiwan for that reason.
And did you bring up your concerns to Speaker Mike Johnson at all?
I mean, I aired my concerns very publicly, and I also, on a number of occasions, actually brought my concerns about Ukraine funding to the speaker. And, he basically over the last couple of months has gone from I will never bring Ukraine funding to the floor to a conversation that we had where he specifically stated that he was not going to, and that he was the reason why Ukraine funding hadn't already come to the floor, to where he's, gotten soft on the issue. And I think that that's not just myself, but a number of contributing reasons as to why there's growing frustrations with him in the conference.
I had a conversation with your colleague, Congressman Warren Davidson, last week, and he said some Republicans feel a bit of buyer's remorse about Speaker Johnson because of the Ukraine aid. Do you feel the same way?
I mean, I can tell you that based on what he campaigned on when he was running for speaker versus who he is now, it's like two separate people. And so I think I stated this earlier today, but I do not support the decisions that he's making. But I do also understand that right now we're in a very slim majority. And so a motion to vacate is not, in my opinion, a smart strategic move. Unfortunately, I don't believe that we would have members that wouldn't essentially sell out our country and potentially broker a deal and or give the gavel to Hakeem Jeffries. I also heard that there were a few members that were considering resigning once a motion to vacate would be brought forward, which would ultimately hand over power to the Democrats anyways. And so, unfortunately, I think that this is going to be a discussion for the 119th Congress. But as of right now, I don't think that I'd be able to vote for Speaker Johnson for a second time.
Do you know who those members are, or would you share who those members are who would resign if there was a motion to vacate brought up?
All I know is that they are more moderate members. I have not been able to fully pin down names, but I do think that it's interesting, and I don't think that this is just rumor based on some comments made by Representative Ken Buck, who, as you know, resigned earlier, actually a few months back, and then also too with the departure of Rep. Gallagher, who coincidentally timed it to where it would cripple the majority and we would be able to host an election to fill that seat. They did say more resignations were coming, and the individual that I talked to is a very credible source within the conference. But again, I mean, I'm not trying to really play chicken with that potential possibility because I do not want the gavel to go to Hakeem Jeffries.
But it sounds like you've lost confidence in his leadership, though. You could say that, right?
I can definitely say that I don't feel like we have someone in the negotiating room that's advocating on behalf of the Republican conference. However, I do understand that he is still better than Hakeem Jeffries. And as a result of that, I would say that motion to vacate right now is not the best strategy.
Former President Donald Trump said this about Speaker Johnson, quote, "We have a majority of one, okay? It's not like he can go and do whatever he wants to do." What do you think of his take?
I mean, I think that he holds the exact same sentiments. And I think President Trump had actually seen a podcast that I did with Representative Gates on his show Firebrand, where we actually discussed this. And again, I wouldn't put it past some of my colleagues who are making only $175,000 a year to say, maybe a lobbying position looks good at maybe double or triple that amount. Maybe I should resign early in an effort to, I think, further their own careers doing something that's not exactly good for the American people.
It feels like there's a fracture in the Republican Party right now, especially when it comes into the House. Those who voted for the aid package saying they have confidence in Mike Johnson's leadership. They think he really was a leader. And then the camp that you're in, where you feel almost like he sold you out a bit here. Do you feel that that divide in conversations with your colleagues?
I think that there is a massive divide, but I don't think it just stops with the foreign aid packages. I think that it's a fundamental ideology that's really, I think, infiltrating, taking over the GOP right now. So you have people like myself who are not from Washington, we're not career politicians, and we're not individuals who are funded by special interests. And then you have my other colleagues who are essentially the lobbyist mouthpiece that will basically advocate for special interests that ultimately hurt the American people. And when you have individuals that are saying that Johnson is really doing great by sending billions of dollars to Ukraine, and yet we have some of the highest inflation ever recorded, the economy's in the crapper right now, excuse my language. And then you have, let's take, for example, issues of student loans or the fact that there's veteran homelessness, all of these issues, and yet they're still finding reasons and ways to advocate for Ukraine funding. Meanwhile, lying to the American people. I mean, take Taiwan, for example. They said that funding would go to Taiwan, right? Wrong. They wrote in a loophole to where they could actually allocate all of that funding we're giving to Taiwan, to Ukraine. So I think that it's just a disingenuous and dishonest argument. But I will also say this, that we're seeing a record number of resignations and or retirements this cycle from people who would be considered more establishment. And the general consensus is that President Trump is going to be going back into the White House in 2024. And I think as a result of that, you're seeing this new wave of candidates kind of come into Washington, but then also to take over the GOP. And I think that that's needed. So what the American people are seeing is growing pains right now. I think that this issue predates my time in Congress. I think there was a lot of bad blood probably going back to maybe about 10 years of grudges and people that have had personal vendettas among each other in Washington. And like I told the American people, last week tempers were pretty flaring. And I think the best thing that the speaker could have done was send people home, but they didn't want to send people home. They wanted to keep them in Washington. I think that that's part of the problem. Too much time in Washington.
Where do you think the Republican Party goes from here? Because you're saying these problems are a decade old. So, what do conversations look like? And then where do you see it going? Because we're in an election year right now.
Yeah, so I think right now, again, you're seeing a lot of these more establishment individuals not seeking reelection. And I think that that's an opportunity for the more populist candidate to get in and ultimately member of Congress that advocates on behalf of the American people. So I think that you're seeing a change really occur within the GOP. But I do think that moving forward, we have to get people into office that are going to look at what's best for the American people and not what's best for corporation and or for other countries, because we are basically hemorrhaging cash, right? A lot of people my age and your age, we can't afford to buy homes right now because of what's happening with the interest rate. Inflation's at an all-time high, and I think a lot of people understand that even just 4 years ago, the economy was a lot better and more affordable. And so when you're seeing people advocate for all of these things that are best for Washington, just understand that they're not good for the rest of the country. And I think that it shows that, especially with this foreign aid package, that you had more Democrats voting for it than Republicans. And so if Speaker Johnson really was advocating for the American people, why is it that Democrats were pushing it, that there was massive, I believe that they got earmarks in exchange for this, and then yet the American people are kind of left, holding the receipt for all of this and really picking up the check. And that's simply not acceptable.
Some critics would call your point of view isolationist. They would say that if there's no aid to Ukraine, Russia steamrolls Ukraine, there's a World War III on our hands, America would have to get involved. What do you say to that criticism?
I think people that have that perspective are not realists, and they also likely haven't had the conversations that I've had with the Ukrainian parliament. So I actually wanted to go understand for myself what was happening in Ukraine. And so I traveled to Poland on a congressional delegation, met with the Ukrainian parliament, and ultimately I was told that not only were they demanding F-35s, but they said that it was the obligation of all Americans to pay $200 a month because Ukraine was doing our job for us in defending freedom. And ultimately, if and when Russia annexed Crimea, that they then wanted to create a mercenary army. That was something that they told a bipartisan delegation of U.S. representatives. So to put it in perspective, I don't think that we should be funding any mercenary armies around the world. And I definitely don't think that it is the obligation of every American to pay $200 to Ukraine when it's funding their pensions. And you can literally find footage of what's happening in Kyiv right now. Those people aren't fighting, they're partying. And so I think that that's a huge slap in the face, especially when we as a country are struggling so much right now. I see a lot of people that seem to be subject matter experts on the internet, but don't really have the life experience to back it.
When you were visiting with that delegation and Ukrainian officials said that to you, did you have the chance to respond at all? Did you have a dialogue, or was it more they were just talking to you?
We definitely had a dialogue. I mean, I was looking at the guy and I was like, that's not something that's not even like, first of all, it's not politically correct, but also it's massively frowned upon to do anything mercenary wise. And the whole reason it came up is because I specifically asked what was going to happen with the amount of veterans and if there was anything that they're doing for mental health in regards to post-traumatic stress disorder because of what was happening. And that was a solution. And so I think that right now, I mean, again, this is the first time that we've really shelled out this much cash to Ukraine. But I also think that given what I've seen, and given that there seems to be no end in sight with this administration and or accountability for Ukraine, I think it's a mistake. I think it's a mistake to get involved. And I don't think that right now we as a country need to engage in another conflict that has actually been elevating this increase in tension versus if we just stayed out altogether.
Congresswoman, per usual, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.